Welcome to 80K Talks, the podcast from 80ktaste.com, a curated guide to the best places, people, and experiences in the Adirondacks. Whether you're a local, a second homeowner, or planning your next trip, we're here to help you experience the Adirondacks in a deeper, more meaningful way. And today we're diving into one of the most iconic Adirondack experiences, fishing. With thousands of lakes, miles of rivers, and year-round opportunities, it's one of the best places in the country to cast a line if you know where to go. And that's exactly why we're excited to talk with Aaron Gaza, a licensed New York State guide who spends his days on the water across the Adirondacks, helping people experience everything from bass and pike to ice fishing in the middle of winter. Aaron, great to have you on 80K Talks.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on here.
We're also pretty excited because Steve and I are not expert at all in fishing.
No.
So we felt like we had to go to a pro. So let's start simple. When people think about fishing in the Adirondacks, what are they really getting access to?
Well, they are getting access to 3,000 lakes, 33,000 miles of rivers. It is an unlimited place to fish and to go do some recreation and fishing or boating. When they hire me, I just take them into some of my hidden secret spots that I found, whether it was introduced by my father or myself that I found, and people are just blown away. And most people come from maybe downstate or out of state, and they are just blown away by the Adirondacks. And so it's a beautiful place, and it's full of fish, and a great place to fish. So
that sounds amazing, but I also can imagine it's sort of intimidating and overwhelming for people. How do you help them get oriented?
Well, it always starts with a basic phone call that I'm not some, man living in a shack in the woods, like some of the
A Unabomber, yeah.
Yeah. And, I'm just like a regular guy that, tries to help them find a place to stay, whether it's if their vibe is an older, hotel or maybe a nice Airbnb or even a retail, in Saratoga or Lake George, a retail hotel. And so that's kind of where we start. And then we pick a lake, or maybe we'll pick a lake first that we might want to fish, and then we'll figure out where they can stay. And I don't do that, but I'll point them in the direction of that. And then obviously restaurants and food it comes next, and all the details of the trip after that. So,
do you have clients who reach out to you interested in fishing for one specific species, or are they just interested in fishing?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. My original business kind of plan or avenue that I wanted to take, and I'll talk about this later, would be, it was originally for giant northern pike in the Adirondacks. That was my focus. And so that was great, but obviously people wanted to catch other fish in the Adirondacks as well. And so bass and walleye and perch and panfish are really popular. And so I've really expanded my wings. My business is based on Great Sacandaga Lake in the lower Adirondacks, but it's expanded further up where other species of fish are more prevalent. And people want to, hey, I want to catch a walleye, deep in the Adirondacks, or I want to catch a lot of walleye or a giant walleye or whatever the case is. So, or a pike, whatever it is.
Let's talk about what drew you into fishing in the first place.
Yeah, it's a long story, so hope you're buckled in here and ready for the roller coaster. Basically, my grandfather in the mid-1950s grew up in the Midwest, Chicago, and started going up into the Minnesota and Canadian wilderness in search of just these remote lakes that had great fishing. And he fell in love with northern pike and the older cousin or older brother of the pike, which is the muskellunge, the muskie. Anyway, and so he was he became a lure maker. He became really passionate. He was a guide as well, and so he started taking my dad in the mid-1960s, and my dad fell in love with it. But my dad moved to Albany area for school, and he missed the Canadian wilderness, and he moved here permanently. And so he wanted to find a lake that reminded him of, or an area that reminded him of that Canadian wilderness. And someone at his work suggested Saranac Lake. And so he went up with his canoe and his buddies and in the late 1970s, and they stumbled upon Middle Saranac Lake, and they paddled into Middle Saranac Lake in the middle of a storm in the summer and ended up in the back of Weller Pond, which has a long history of Adirondack pioneers and adventurers. And they ended up having to sleep in a lean-to, and it was a wild experience. But anyway, he brought me up when I was 9, 10, 11 years old. And boy, I had fished, in a canoe in local ponds and lakes where I grew up in the Albany area. But when I went up there, it gives me chills talking about it. The Adirondacks are hard to describe, when you're in the beauty of it. But getting to camp on the islands of Saranac Lake really put that fire in my bones. And then I caught my first northern pike in one of the bays in Saranac Lake, and it lit a passion that obviously has carried me right into adulthood, into my full-time job. And so throughout high school, I bought a little rubber raft, and we would put it in the back of our van, and my mom would just take me anywhere. And I was homeschooled, so I would do my work at 2:00 in the morning, or that's not true, 8 or 9 o'clock at night, or 6 in the morning. And so I could free up my fishing time, and we would go all over. And that's kind of where it all got birthed. And anyway, yeah.
When did you realize that you could help other people experience this in a deeper way?
Yeah, so the rubber raft it finally grew into a bigger boat, and everybody, at the time, Facebook and social media was just becoming a thing, and I was starting to post a lot, and people were like, "We got to go with you, wherever you're going, you're catching fish, and I wasn't a pro by any sense of the means, but I was catching fish because I was doing it every day, and eventually your lure will get hit if you're out there every day. And so, I just started filling my calendar with friends, family, people that went fishing, and next thing you know, my free time outside of work was packed, and with people trying to go fishing with me. And I remember I was sitting on a forklift working in a warehouse in Albany, and I said, I was so frustrated. It was like minus 10 degrees in the warehouse. It was like brutally cold. And I looked up on my phone how to become a fishing guide, and then the rest is history. So that's kind of where it started, just filling the boat. And now here I am.
I figured if you're going to be sitting in minus 10 degree weather, you might as well do it on a lake.
On a lake, yeah.
Not on a
yeah. Oh, boy.
Have you fished in other parts of New York State?
Yeah, I fished, the Lake Champlain and the St. Lawrence Seaway, all the way out to Lake Chautauqua in the western half of the state, and then all throughout the Northeast. So yeah, I love it.
How do you think the Adirondacks compare to those other parts?
There's something to be said about being on a lake and you're surrounded by houses. You just don't get that, that wilderness feel. You don't get that American spirit, I'm living off the land type, feel. And so I'll reference Saranac Lake because that's where my heart is, and that's where I just spent all my time growing up in the Adirondacks, camping there. But there's just something to be said about no houses, all protected state land, knowing that, unfortunately the Adirondacks were deforested, but every time you step on some of the land, you're like, I wonder if anybody's ever been here before, because you just have that feeling like you're the pioneer and you're the first one to experience it. And that's the feeling you get on many Adirondack lakes, whether it's Long Lake or Tupper Lake or Saranac Lake, or I could go on for days. There's just a feeling of remoteness, self-independence, and obviously beauty of being surrounded by mountains. And I'm trying to describe it. It's hard to describe in words, but it's one of my favorite places to be.
One thing I also appreciate about the Adirondacks is, it's 6 million acres, like we always say, which is bigger than the state of New Jersey. I feel like I have that on repeat, but it's different. You mentioned Lake Champlain. The Adirondack coast is different than Saranac Lake, which is different from Sacandaga, which is different from, Blue Mountain Lake. So there's a lot of lakes and a lot of variety, I find.
Yeah, even on Great Sacandaga Lake, where 90% of my business happens, when we meet for the first time with a client, we meet at the dock, at the marina, surrounded by $1 million homes. And, I think that gives people a sense that, okay, I'm not going to, I'm not going off and, going to die in the wilderness here. But, but then we go out in the lake and we turn the corner from one of the points, and it's this beautiful view of the Adirondacks, the lower Adirondacks, which has some beautiful foothills. miles. And the further we go up in Great Sacandaga Lake, which is 29 miles long, by the way, as we go into mile number 20 north, mile 25, the houses start disappearing, and people, it's unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, people's phones start getting pulled out for pictures, and it's you can tell they're just starting to look around, and it really is starting to take their breath away, and it captivates people in a way that no phone or TV could ever do.
Yeah.
So
I feel that way a lot about Lake George. I think people often associate Lake George with the Village, which is very busy. But once you get up, past the Village, Diamond Point, Bolton Landing, and further north, it's just stunning, and you get a real sense of the remoteness. I've heard from anglers, I'm not a fishing expert, but I was talking to a family member who is. And he mentioned to me that he keeps going further north each year to catch pike, that, he gets the sense that the population is declining. Is that your experience too?
Yes and no. Yes, because, and there's a little bit of backstory here. In the last 10 years, fishing electronics and electronic advancement or just fishing technology has exploded in development. And so what's happening is, I'll use Garmin. The brand Garmin has come out with a software or a sonar that can scan a lake, the bottom of the lake, and uncover fish that you, in 100 to 200 feet of water, that you would have never known existed. And so what's happening is, it's no longer $10,000 to buy, it's $2,000 or $3,000, which is still a lot, but people are buying it, and they're buying it a lot. And so fish that have never been seen lures before or never been caught before are getting caught, and in high numbers. So the sonar is uncovering fish, and that's a great benefit to my business, and those that can handle that responsibility well. Unfortunately, just like any law, there's a lawbreaker, and that sonar has gotten into the wrong hands, and people are wiping out fisheries, not just northern pike, but other species are getting wiped out of lakes just based on the fact that they can go and catch now 200 fish, and they keep all 200 fish, even though it's not the law. And it's heartbreaking. It's really sad. And there's obviously a long laundry list of things that have gone, or animals that have gone extinct in the Adirondacks due to overfishing long before sonar. So I have great concern, but I have great hope that there's more conservationists and more people that are aware of catch and release. So to answer your question directly, I have to tell people that unfortunately Great Sacandaga Lake does not have a great population of pike anymore. It's actually a struggling population. There's very large pike, and people know how to catch them, and they post them on social media. So it seems like there's a lot more pike, but there really isn't. So if somebody's looking to catch a lot of northern pike in high populations, they're going to have to go further north in the Adirondacks. That is absolutely true, where they haven't seen lures, where they haven't been, scanned by sonar, and people haven't found them. So long answer to a short question.
No, I had no idea about any of that. When I think of overfishing, I think of, coastal regions. I never even thought about that in New York. Is there anything that can be done to help reverse that trend?
Yeah, I wish I had an iconic Theodore Roosevelt quote here, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. But my thing that I like to say is, the key to the success of the fishery, or the future of the fishery, is in the hands of the fishermen. And I think it's the duty of every responsible American or New Yorker to responsibly catch and keep. If you want to keep fish, do it within the limits. Do it during a time when the fish aren't laying eggs, and don't target fish, out of season. And so I think it's in the hands of the fishermen, but New York State has done a wonderful job in tightening fishing regulations where it's appropriate, or on certain bodies of water that have been abused. So I'm very thankful for New York State's efforts in their conservation, and their help. Because obviously everybody wants to catch more fish, but I'm concerned for my future generations. When I'm long gone, and my kids and their kids are fishing, and they hear of grandpa's stories of how the fishing was so great, and it's no longer like that. And I can say that I've heard that countless times, you should have been here 50 years ago when the fishing was so good, and then I ask, well, what happened? They're like, well, we used to keep fish all the time and now we can't catch any, and I hear that, and I'm tired of hearing that. And I think it's time to kind of roll up our sleeves and really practice conservation.
Is it ignorance, or do people know they should not be doing it?
I honestly think, I try not to ridicule or criticize. I honestly think people are, genuinely trying to feed their families or fill the freezers with like kind of an American spirit. I'm going to live off the land, and which is great. Fresh caught fish are some of the most delicious, healthy things you could ever eat. Unfortunately, what's happening is, you'll every day, an individual is going out and filling his freezer and multiple freezers, and that's a dangerous egg to walk on, because it can, that fishery can collapse. And I can go on and on. I'm speaking specifically of small Adirondack lakes, Lake Eaton next to Long Lake, Minerva Lake in Olmstonville, Weller Pond in Saranac Lake. These little ponds that are bursting with fish, but can, in just a very short amount of time, can get hurt really badly because they're so small, and there's not an unlimited population. And so, anyway, yeah.
I hope that the people who are listening to this podcast, if they're not aware of some of these things, I hope we can help spread the word.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what it's the experience. What's the difference between someone having an okay day and a great day out there? So
Adirondack weather is a big deciding factor on whether you have an amazing fishing day or struggle or just have to call it a day. So thankfully, forecasts, weather apps are pretty accurate, although storms do brew in very quickly and can be dead wrong, the forecast that is. So that plays a big factor. So keep your forecast handy and keep an eye out on the skies and on radar. What other factors? Whether you're dressed appropriately, especially ice fishing. Boy, if you're not appropriately dressed ice fishing, I'm going to have you in the shack, with a heater on, next to the heater, rubbing your toes, so that's a big one. Multiple layer socks, don't wear cotton. I'm referring to all the great hiking podcasts that I've listened to on 80K Talks. I've benefited from that myself, and then I would also encourage you, maybe for the first time, if you've never been ice fishing, go with a guide. That'll really help you, whether you have a great day or not. And I would say the same for if anybody's ever owned a boat or trailered a boat, you'll know that things go wrong very quickly. And so part of hiring a guide is that I've already had all those things go wrong, and I have backups for everything, whether a backup engine or a backup tire on the trailer or a backup fishing rod because they fell in the water. The list could go on. So that really, decides on whether people have a great day or not, is whether things go right logistically. So
what's something that people sometimes overlook, or they're just don't have the experience? What are some of the details that they might not get right, like timing or location?
Well, I think for fishing wise, everybody wants to catch a big fish in July and August off their dock, right? Because that's when everybody's here in the summer, and that's the time that everybody wants to catch fish. But unfortunately, the water is very warm in July and August, and fish do not like warm water. And so everybody complains about how, we don't really catch that many fish off our dock, like maybe in the spring or the fall. So spring and fall is a really great time to catch a fish. And it's a really simple mistake that everybody's trying to catch a fish maybe off their dock in the summer. But the fish aren't there. And so in the spring and fall, they're underneath the dock because that's where the cool water is. I'm speaking specifically of pike and walleye, whereas in the summer, bass tend to go deeper, or maybe they're under the dock. But anyway, that's a big factor on why people have a good day there. Yeah. So
what's your tip for black fly season and avoiding black flies?
Avoid it.
Boy. Honestly, as a guide, I have a good gauge on where to go. So, certain lakes are just they're like prime black fly season. And I know I've been to that lake maybe the day before, I've checked it out, and I'm like, do not go to this lake. We have to switch trips. So as a guide, I will switch a lake based on, the black fly forecast. And a lot of times, Saranac Lake may be behind Sacandaga because they're, 800 miles apart. And so, so you got to, or 50, whatever mile apart. And, anyway, so yeah, there's different seasons based on how north you go. So I will plan a trip based according, but it is absolutely a factor on whether people have a great day or not, is being swarmed by black flies.
Yeah, yeah. It's as you were talking, And you mentioned earlier, 3,000 lakes, tens of thousands of miles of streams and rivers. It just struck me. We had the Adirondack Architectural Heritage folks on a few episodes ago, and they do these really cool tours of Adirondack architecture. And, we got to talking about the importance of having a guide to show you things, and I referenced, going to the ruins at Pompeii and having a guide was critical because I wouldn't have known. I mean, I could not have read my Rick Steves and walked around and really gotten a great sense of what I was looking at. I think it really applies to your business and what you're doing, because even if you're a very experienced fisher person or angler, if it's your first time in the Adirondacks, how do you even know where to go?
Yeah, I always make a joke that I'm not at home just flipping burgers all day. My job is to find lakes that are full of fish and the fish are feeding actively at that time when I bring somebody. And so as a guide, everybody sees the pictures and the success that I may have on the particular day that I bring the client. But what's not known is that, let's say I have a trip on a Thursday and I have Tuesday and Wednesday off. Tuesday and Wednesday are spent preparing for that day. Maybe I gave the client two options near each other. I'm going to find the lake that is appropriate for them and is producing fish. And so I'm often driving hundreds of miles a day prior to the trip in finding, a lake that's appropriate. I'm speaking again specifically of ice fishing here, but on the open water, I do some of that. But again, 90% of my business is on Great Sacandaga Lake in the open water season on the boat. And so I'm on the water every single day on that lake, and I'm guiding every day. So I'm on the fish. Even if they've moved 100 yards, I can, find them in a very quick manner because I was on them the day before. And so that's a really big part of a guide. It's like, instead of spending half the day looking for the fish, or hitting a rock or getting caught in a rainstorm, you can trust a guide that he's going to get you right on the fish, which saves hours and hours of frustration and time. And that's a big part of why people might hire me. So,
hey, Aaron, why don't you give us your URL in case people are now interested in finding a guide?
Yeah. So my website, I built it myself, and I spend a lot of time editing it and trying to bolster it. But www.aarons, AARONS, guideservice.net. That's www.aaronsguideservice.net. Really active on there, but I'm also just as active on my social media, which is Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. You can find us on Google as well. And I'm posting daily. A lot of times just, part of my, what life as a guide is like. You can follow that, or what fish we're catching, or what the status of my boat is, or, all the ins and outs of a fishing guide in the Adirondacks.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love your post. I follow you, and it's more than just fishing. I mean, you take some great pictures. You've brought up ice fishing, and how is the experience different between summer and winter, other than the obvious, right? The temperature. How does that experience change between the open water and ice fishing?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about the beauty of the Adirondacks, and a lot of times I'm just kind of referencing the summer, but there's something really special about being in the Adirondacks in the winter. And I say that not as a tourist trap or to try to get somebody to just come here in the winter. It is the most breathtaking thing to walk out in the middle of a lake when it's fully frozen, fully covered in snow, and the trees are covered. So the beauty factor in ice fishing is 50% of the fun. Even if we don't catch a fish, people are still blown away. As a guide, once again, my job is to find fish and to find lakes that are safe. So being able to basically stand on top of a fish, underneath you, and to drop a line down. We have live sonar on the ice, so we're able to see the lure drop down and see the fish come up to it and grab it. It is one of the most thrilling things for kids and for adults, new fishermen, experienced fishermen. And so that's just something that, we get to experience, some of that on the boat, but doing it on the ice, there's a real independent American spirit about it, doing it. And So that's, I think the beauty factor is really increased, and then being able to just drill a hole on the ice, drop a lure down, and see a fish come up and grab it is, it makes me smile and get me energized just talking about it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Steve's a big fan of going out in he doesn't fish, but you love to go out on the lake.
Oh, yeah.
Especially at night. If there's a full moon, it's almost like daylight out there. It's incredible.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've had to use the moon to get me off the lake sometimes if I'm stuck late into the night. I'm fishing into the night, and I'm off. Wait, just keep going and going. What happens is you drill one hole, and then you start drilling 2 and 3, and you're off in the middle of the lake, and you get all turned around. So that happens by myself. I won't do that with my clients. So,
and night does come quickly in the wintertime.
Yes, yeah, 4:00 hits hard. Funny story. One night I had this is a great story. So I was up in Middle Saranac Lake, which if anybody's been on Middle Saranac Lake, it is remote. There's maybe 2 houses buried in the woods, and that's about it. And I dropped off the clients at like 3:00, and I said, I'll clean up camp. Let's get you back, right? So it's the sun's going down, and I'm cleaning up camp. Well, if anybody's also been on lakes in the Adirondacks later in the season, slush gets really bad and the water starts coming up on top of the ice. It's not a safety concern. It's just, it kind of blends in with the snow and becomes a slush. Anyway, this darkness started falling and I got stuck in the slush with my sled. And the darkness fell and the coyotes were howling off in the distance. And I'm out in the middle of the lake. And I finally couldn't move. And so everything froze, like the slush froze to my sled. And anyway, and so I fell to my knees and I said, good Lord, just take me, because I didn't know what to do. And finally I ended up getting some help and we were able to get the sled off. And anyway, I went home, I got home and I was like, this is awful. But that's just kind of a backstory of what happens behind the scenes as a guide that may happen to you if you go by yourself and you're not prepared, and so that happens to me. That's part of the prep of a guide and cleanup. And, I ensure that I have help, as backup, just in case something were to happen. So
I would be remiss if I did not reference our friends at Saranac, the search and rescue folks, who say one headlamp is good, 2 headlamps are better. So
yes,
that's great. That's a real life story. Yeah.
Yeah. I could go on for quite a few of them like that. So, but we don't have
time. If someone's planning a fishing trip to the Adirondacks, what's the right place to start? Does it start with picking the right lake? How do you prepare?
Yeah, I think it would be, how remote do you want to go? Are you looking to stay in Lake George and, maybe fish, some lakes, into the Adirondacks and have a nice hotel to stay at? Or are you looking to stay at a cabin, in Lake Placid or in Long Lake or Saranac Lake, and are you really looking for that remote experience? So try to figure that out in your head. These sauna cabins, or tiny homes, maybe not fit for a family, but they might be great for an individual or a couple or something. And maybe a hotel is more appropriate for you and your family. So wrap your head around that. And then, either reach out to you guys, ADK Taste, and with some options, or maybe reach out to me and we can figure out a lake that would be appropriate for you and your family. Funny stuff. I had this winter, I had an inquiry. The mom and dad said, we have a 6-month-old baby and their 2 kids. We'd like to go ice fishing. So they wrapped up the baby in the car seat, and I found a nice, a hotel. I know they were staying at some friends, but anyway, and we found a lake that had a nice parking lot. It had like a warming hut nearby. I had my hut, and so we transported the baby out with a snowmobile, and we got him in the tent, and the kids. And we caught a fish. We showed it to the newborn baby, and so. But they let me know that ahead of time, and I was able to structure my entire day around that. And anyway, so it was a fun 2 hours out on the ice. Great experience. It worked out perfectly, and
that's amazing.
Yeah. Yep.
This may seem a little basic, but for listeners that aren't as experienced, there are different times of year for different species, correct?
That's correct.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is a big part of my business. So in the springtime, we'll start with spring. Northern pike and very large northern pike are very active because they just laid their eggs. Actually, as we speak, here in mid-April, they are laying their eggs as we speak. And so as they're wrapping up, as May comes around, they are going to be feeding in the post-spawn, post-laying egg time, and they feed incredibly heavy. And this goes for bass as well as walleye and pike. And so springtime is when I pack my calendar. Everybody comes in May and June because that is some of your best fishing. Summertime, the walleye stay active, the bass stay really active. Pike tend to lose a little bit of weight. They don't feed as heavily, but it's still a very productive time. Obviously, the sun is shining. We never really have to deal with bad weather unless we're in thunderstorms. And so that's just a fun, more family friendly, less, big fish oriented, although we do catch plenty of big fish in the summer. Now, as the water cools in the fall, everybody goes home, they pack up their camps. That's another prime time for me. And I have a huge clientele that comes in the fall. And so northern pike, as the water cools, they sense that winter is coming and they start feeding and binging in the shallow water. And so that's a really fun time. And then winter, everything slows down, but the fish stay feeding, but they just start moving slower because their bodies are going slower because they're cold-blooded, and it slows them down naturally. But the winter time is a productive time, but we're obviously not reeling in lures really fast. We're dropping them straight down to the mouth of the fish and kind of finesse jigging until the fish finally comes and bites it. So we catch a lot of fish in the winter as well. So every season is different. Obviously, wilderness experience with scenery, but the fish do something a little different each season, and it's all either related to feeding or laying eggs.
The fall is my favorite season in the Adirondacks. I love the winter too. Probably spring is my least favorite because of the mud. And it's just
Yep.
miserable.
Yep.
But the fall on an Adirondack Lake in the fall with the changing leaves is one of the most incredible experiences, almost like seeing the Northern Lights. It's spectacular. So
Yes.
I'll make that plug.
Yeah, from a naturalist standpoint or a perfectionist standpoint, seeing a mountain, with the colors, usually the maple trees or the oak trees turning colors is really beautiful. But then that also signifies in a fisherman's brain that the cooling nights causing the leaves to change mean the fish are starting to feed very heavily. And so, boy, some of the fish still come like out of the water, backs out of the water because they're chasing like a shark on the beach, chasing bait fish around. You can see it happen, and it's a really active time for fish in the fall.
Is it my imagination, or particularly from like late August through September and October, it just seems like the lakes are stiller. It doesn't, there isn't, I mean, granted, there aren't as many people out, but it just seems like in the spring, there's more wind. Through the summer, there's people, but in the fall, when there's fewer people, it doesn't seem to have the same amount of wind.
That's a unique observation. I think you're right. March is the windiest time of year, and that goes right into April. I'm looking out the window, watching the trees bend over now.
Yeah.
And absolutely, yeah. Fall is one of the times where everything goes quiet. People leave. The canoers may be out there, but if we're out even on Sacandaga or Long Lake or Saranac Lake, if we see a person on a midweek, I'd be surprised sometimes. A lot of times we have the lake to ourselves, and that's a really special experience. And one thing I'll say to that too, I got asked recently, just a couple of days ago, they said, our world is seems like it's closing in on us, right? The noise of the outside, the city, the news, it feels like the world is spinning out of control. And somebody asked me, when do you think our population is all going to come back to peace, of the world? And I said, I don't know if that'll ever happen, but we still have places we can go to experience that peace. And I think the Adirondacks is one of them, and specifically in the fall, but any time of year. So,
is there a common mistake that you see beginners make over and over?
We kind of talked about it earlier. I think just not being prepared, while we talk about the beauty of the Adirondacks, it's also very remote and it can be very harsh. And, unfortunately, has taken lives because people aren't prepared. I would say, the early mornings, even in the summer, are always freezing cold. So just dress appropriately, my goodness. And so obviously, dressing appropriately is one. And then not doing research on where they're fishing or where or what to use. So they're just not using appropriate fishing gear, or they're not going to the right lake that's producing fish, and or maybe they've been misled, and so that's a common mistake as well.
You mentioned that you spent a lot of time on Great Sacandaga Lake. It's huge, and I don't think it's as well known as some of the other Adirondack lakes. Tell us a little bit more about that area.
Yeah, Great Sacandaga Lake is kind of what Lake George used to be 50 years ago, in the sense that not a lot of people are on, there is a lot of homes on it, but a lot of people don't really use it for recreation, or at least in the spring and fall for fishing. It gets underfished, it goes under the radar. And one of the things that people overlook, and I don't know if you guys knew this, is that the northern pike, Great Sacandaga Lake, produced a world's record northern pike in 1940. And that fish held as a world record until 1983, when it was beat in Germany, and then it was beat in 2006 in Canada, but it was never beaten again in the US. So that fish still holds the United States and New York record, northern pike. And so I get people that come from all over the world, but specifically all over the country, in search of that next fish. So, and it still to this day produces monster northern pike. And so that's a big part of my business every year, is we target those pike, and we've come close to the record a couple times, and the goal is to beat that record. So maybe one day you'll see me in the news, or one of my clients. So yeah.
Be in the background of that picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the nice thing too about Sacandaga is it's super accessible.
Yeah.
It's as you said earlier, it's sort of like the southern, slightly western part of the park, and it's accessible from, Albany, downstate, and Western New York as well.
Yeah, I get folks that come in from, the Syracuse area. It's only like an hour and 20 minutes from Syracuse, or an hour and a half. It's only 3 hours from Buffalo, 3.5 hours from New York City, and even Montreal, it's only like 2.5 hours. So, it's an accessible place. It's funny, people get overwhelmed by the thought of going to the Adirondacks, and then they put in Google Maps or Apple Maps, Sacandaga. They're like, oh, it's only a 35-minute drive from Clifton Park or Saratoga. So, and it's also a big lake. So the arm of the lake goes almost into the Glens Falls region. And then the southern half goes all the way down to Amsterdam and I-87 or I-90. So, it's a very accessible lake and very easy to get to. So it really goes under the radar. It's one of my favorite lakes to be on, hence why I moved here.
What's your favorite post-fishing meal in the Adirondacks?
Oh, this is really bad. Stewart's Pizza.
Oh.
I'm gonna die of a heart attack because I said that. But that's bad. Where's a really good place? I would say Sport Island Pub on Great Sacandaga Lake. So Sport Island Pub is owned by the Lanzi family. The Lanzi family owns a number of restaurants on the lake and off the lake as well. They do a wonderful job. They employ a lot of people around the around the Sacandaga region, and for that matter, the Adirondacks. And they've been good to my business. They let me use their docks. They, I help. People go and eat there as well because they meet me at the restaurant, and then we use their docks on the lake, and they have a great burger there, and it's just a great place to eat. So
Awesome. That's awesome. Do you prefer to fish in the morning or at sunset?
I like morning because though it's really cold, I always know usually the sun is going to be shining.
Right.
Whereas
warm up.
the evening, I'm watching the sun go down. I'm adding layers, and then I run out of layers, and then I'm freezing. So,
You've talked a lot about pike. Is that your favorite species to fish?
It is. There is nothing like watching a northern. They're so aggressive. They call them the freshwater barracuda, and the barracuda is, something they're known to hit a diamond ring on somebody's finger, when they're swimming in the lake. So, or in the ocean. But anyway, a pike is very aggressive, and there's nothing like watching a northern pike come up, and they'll actually hit like right on the top surface of the water, and they're enormous fish, and it's one of the greatest thrills and adrenaline.
They're also, well, I don't want to insult the pike, but it's an ugly fish.
Yeah, very ugly. Yeah, and maybe we can tie this back into when I was talking about, overfishing or people not liking one particular fish. Northern pike have a really bad reputation in the Adirondacks because they eat anything in sight. And so they've done some hurt on some of the natural. They've gotten into like pristine brook trout lakes, and they've eaten a lot of like brook trout and lake trout and stuff. So they were a contributing bass, walleye, pike, or when New York State came in and stocked a lot of the lakes with pike, walleye, bass, and they stocked the pristine brook trout lakes, and it hurt them really bad. So I think a combination of stocking pike and then also people keeping mass numbers of brook trout. I'll actually reference Oliver Whitman in his journal. He has a great book. He's a 1800s guide in the Wells area. Talked about the Adirondack brook trout lakes and streams, claiming he caught 40 to 60 pounds of brook trout per day on a good day. And one brook trout is typically right around a half pound or 1 pound. So he was catching and keeping these mass numbers of brook trout. And that's how good the fishing was at that time. And if anybody knows, they're down to like 43 lakes out of those 3,000 lakes that are left with brook trout. So, so pike have a really bad reputation because they eat anything in sight, but they are native to the Adirondacks. They're native to the Lake Champlain area and St. Lawrence River and areas outside, but they've made their way into most Adirondack lakes and streams, but they are very fun to catch. So
very interesting. I did not know that much about pike. Now I feel like I know a little bit more. So thank you.
Yeah.
This has just been a great conversation, Aaron. Thank you so much. I'm almost convinced, I think, to try ice fishing next winter, but we'll have to see. I'll have to re-listen to this episode again.
Believe it when I see it.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. How do you know when the lake is fully frozen?
Yeah, that's a really big part of why hiring a guide is so important. I start out by, scouring the internet. Anybody who's talking about a specific lake, is it safe to go on? People are always writing on Facebook and stuff, but I will go physically. I grab a really heavy iron bar and I tiptoe out on the lake and I start slamming it really hard on the ice. And that tells me my thickness. It's called a spud bar. And one hit usually means it's not safe. You slam it down a second time, you may have an inch or two of ice. You slam it down a third time, you got 3 or 4 inches where you can walk on. And that's where it starts. And then I drill a hole and I get a measuring tape. And then I start, going all over where I think I'm going to fish that day. And so I test out that whole area prior to us even scheduling the trip. I'll do that. I call them ice measuring days. I'll hit like 10 or 15 lakes in a single day where I'm just driving all over the Adirondack looking for lakes that I think have frozen well. I'm also keeping an eye on low temperatures. Does the lake have snow on top of it? If there's snow, then it maybe insulates the lake or the ice and it doesn't grow as fast. So a lot of factors, and that's really important. And even just calling me as a guide and saying, hey, is this lake safe? I'm always open to doing that and reporting if a lake is safe. But when you hire a guide, I've always pre-checked the ice. So yeah.
A lot of lakes and towns have their own Facebook groups, like the Schroon Lake has a group.
Yes.
Our lake has a group. And in the winter, it's full of people wanting to know if you can go out on the ice and how deep it is. And that's a good way to sort of gauge it. Well, again, this has been terrific. Thank you so much. Mention your URL one more time.
Yeah, we'll skip the www part because that's not needed anymore, but it's aaronsguideservice.net, AARONS, aaronsguideservice.net. But then also at Aaron's Guide Service on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Google, and YouTube. So, yeah.
Well, before we've caught you and before we release you, we like to ask our guests what their favorite spot in the Adirondacks or a hidden gem, and it can be anything. It can be a stream or a lake. It can be an outfitter. It can be a museum. It can be anything that you want. But if you were telling somebody, a close friend who's coming to the Adirondacks for the first time, what would you say? Oh, you don't miss this.
Well, I think from a fishing standpoint, since I'm a fisherman and this has been a fishing theme podcast, you got to go to Jim's Bait Shop in Mayfield, New York. It's on the very southern end, right on the border of the Adirondacks, but technically it's in the Adirondack Park. It is a fishing... Well, it's not a Bass Pro Shop, so I can't call it a superstore, but it's a hole in the wall. The guy he's been in business since the 1980s, and he has all his fishing tackle for sale in his garage, and he has live bait that and he works really closely with a lot of big, outfitters and fishing companies, and just like everything you'd ever want in a fishing store is in there. It's really small, but every time you look, there's a wall full of fishing stuff. So highly recommend there. And then just for going back to a place to eat, I mentioned Sport Island Pub. If you're ever in like the Lake Placid, on the way up to Lake Placid, there's a little diner in Keene, New York called the Noonmark Diner. Oh my gosh. And it was funny. We were always too poor growing up to stop there. On the way, we would stop at McDonald's instead. But as I've grown, older and have had the freedom to be able to go to where I want, I always stop there. And so it's one of my favorites. So
You had me at Noonmark. I love that place. They serve breakfast all day long. I love breakfast food. They've got really good homemade, really honest to goodness food, and their pies are amazing. And the first time I went there, I sort of heard something about the pies, but sitting there and watching people come in and out with 4, 5, 6 pies, I was like, I've got to get a pie. There's something going on here. So those are great. I don't know why, but I love going to like the fishing part of a store. Like we have this place called Crossroads here just outside of Chestertown. I love going downstairs and looking at all the stuff. I don't fish, but there's just something. It's same thing with hardware stores. There's something about seeing all that stuff that just is fascinating to me. So I've got to check out your favorite bait shop now.
yes.
Well, Aaron, we're going to let you go, and thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us. This has been really just a great time for us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'll end with one fun thing is that one of my favorite things to do is while I'm driving, checking lakes in the winter for ice thickness, or just driving up in the Adirondacks, I listen to an 80K Talks podcast, or I'll re-listen to one. So it's been a theme. Sometimes I listen to music, but sometimes, many times, more times than not, I'm listening to an 80K Talk. So highly recommend doing that while you're driving a specific route or in the Adirondacks. It really brings to life what you're driving through.
Awesome. Truth be told, I probably shouldn't admit this. I listen to my podcast, or our podcast, Steve and my podcast. So that's great. All right, Aaron, thanks so much. Take care.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
I really want to go fishing now.
I think you should. Send you out there in the middle of winter.
The thing that keeps coming up in my mind is the foot gear. Like, do I have a pair of boots that are warm enough? Because I think your feet must be frozen when you get out on that lake because they're touching the ice.
Again, I've never ice fished, but I've walked on a lot of frozen lakes, and ice fishermen tend not to stand in one place. They move around to their various
ice fisher women.
And fisher women, ice fisher people. And so I suspect that goes a long way to keeping their feet and hands warm. And there's a whole nother school of, no pun intended, fisher people that they go out in their little ice shanties.
Yeah.
Those things can get rather elaborate. So, there's also the more stationary folk that sit in their little cabin on the ice. And
that's actually a view I love, like driving by Scroon Lake, for example, and seeing all the little huts out there, or even our little lake in the winter. I don't know, there's something about it.
Yeah, there don't seem like there's as many as there used to be.
I think the opposite. I see them, I feel like there's a lot more, but who knows? It really is amazing how much access we have to all these different waterways in the Adirondacks, all of these lakes. It's 3,000 lakes and ponds. That's not an exaggeration. And, Aaron mentioned some that I've not heard of today. In addition to some of the more, well-known places like Saranac Lake. But there's really an abundance of places. And I love, the idea that there are people who are spending their days helping people find the best places to fish or experience in the Adirondacks. So, whether you're brand new or have been fishing your whole life, there's always something else to discover here.
There's a lake for everyone.
There's a lake for everyone. And I say this at least every other episode, there's something for everyone up here. So whether you like to fish, if you like to hunt, if you like to paint in the open air, if you like to go to museums, if you like to water ski, if you like to go to the movies, there are paddleboard. There's such a variety of stuff to do here year round. And that just brings us to adktaste.com. That's what we are all about, is helping people find all the good stuff in the Adirondacks. So listener, we hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Please rate and review us and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. It will help other people who are looking for insights about all the great things in the Adirondacks find that content. And if you go to our website, adktaste.com, please subscribe to our newsletter. You'll get our weekly guide to what's happening now and what's great in the Adirondacks. And just to reiterate, that's adktaste.com. And what if people have questions, Steve?
Ooh. In the unlikely event you have a question or a comment.
Because we haven't talked enough.
Right. Or you just want to say something to us and tell us how beautiful we look on our podcast. Or if you have a suggestion for someone like Aaron who might make a great interview, please feel free to reach out to us at info@adktaste.com. We'd be happy to hear from you.
I think we have a nice little stockpile of questions that it's time to do another reader mailbag. So be looking
you keep
for
teasing.
that.
We haven't done it yet.
Well, that's because we have so many good guests booked coming up. So maybe we'll answer a question or two at the end of the next episode or something like that.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah, every now and then a blind squirrel gets a nut, Steve. So,
You know.
All right, listener, thanks for joining, and we'll see you out there.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.